This is the DFS First Look Podcast, breaking down everything you need to know for daily fantasy sports in 15 minutes. This is your host, Joshua Schwager.
Welcome into episode 5 of the DFS First Look Podcast. Today we'll be looking into the weekly question of Clayton Kershaw, Felix Hernandez, David Price, or Madison Bumgarner. We'll be looking into how good Danny Salazar actually is, and is Jason Hammel legit? Which pitcher do we think will have the worst outcome on today's slate? And we'll be looking into cash play, GPP play, and stacks, and a whole bunch more on today's edition of DFS First Look Podcast. As a general rule of thumb, though, make sure to always check the starting lineups, as this podcast is made well in advance of when those starting lineups do come on out. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So to go ahead and answer that week-long question debate, this week the obvious answer is Clayton Kershaw. Clayton Kershaw going up against the St. Louis Cardinals, he has the highest win at 35.43. I really think that he has a good opportunity to be the highest scoring pitcher on the night, and I think that with K9 of 11.43, there's really not much to worry about. I mean, his BIBIP actually suggests that he's been very unlucky lately. His xFIP is about 1.5 points lower than his ERA currently, and his SIERA is around 2.4. Clayton Kershaw isn't struggling, guys. He's not. He's just unlucky. His defense is letting a lot of balls through, and it's just kind of been the habit of how it's been going. Next on the list is Felix Hernandez against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay isn't that great of a team. They know how to get on base. They know how to win through attrition. They know how to pitch, and they know how to defend. That's about what the Tampa Rays know how to do. It's going to be a really hard test for the Seattle Mariners. They know how to come close in every single game that they're in. I really think that Felix Hernandez might actually suffer a little bit today, but overall, his K9 of 9 and his low walk rate and his low home run per 9 is actually going to carry him through this. I mean, the peripherals look like he's getting really lucky. He's leaving 90% of the people on base. He's had some very low BIBIP, but overall, he's Felix Hernandez. He's still the king. But I do think today he's dethroned by Clayton Kershaw. Next, I have Jason Hammel against the Washington Nationals. The Nationals are no easy foe, as everyone knows. They have Bryce Harper. They have, Escobar. Hopefully that injury isn't too bad. They have Anthony Rendon coming back, Ryan Zimmerman. I mean, their list of bats continues to grow bigger and bigger and bigger in a season where we thought their pitching was going to be the best part of them. Well, anyways, Jason Hammel looks like the third best option. He's been phenomenal so far this year with an ERA at 2.98, a FIP at 2.96, an xFIP at 3, and a SIERA at 2.97. His K9 against lefties is over 10. I mean, he is really doing really well this year, and people look at him as a fluke. He's not a fluke, ladies and gentlemen. He is legit. His peripherals actually suggest that this is very much sustainable. Maybe he has good defense play for him, but that's about it. Next is Madison Bumgarner against the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, I really like Madison Bumgarner as the secondary to Clayton Kershaw in cash play today. I think the Philadelphia Phillies are in no position to be beating him up in any way, shape, or form. His K9 is not the best at 7.92, but he has better stuff than that K9 suggests. His BIBIP and his left on base suggests that he's actually due for a little bit of a regression, where his ERA is 3.12 and his xFIP is at 3.65, with the SIERA around 3.54. He's not really struggling to either the left-handed or the right-handed batters. He's doing a little worse against righties than lefties, but overall I think that the righties will correct itself. It's not something that blares at you. If he can increase his K9, which he should against the Phillies, and if he can keep the runs down, I think that he's top, if not the second best option for cash play. I don't like the Philadelphia Phillies against anybody, and especially not against an ace like Madison Bumgarner. The next option for me is Ronaldo Ventura against the Texas Rangers. It seems to be pretty common on this podcast that I tell you about the Texas Rangers. They're not as good as their record suggests that they are. They're not as good as their bats suggest that they are. They're actually getting very lucky. They're getting the balls through a lot of pitchers' defenses. They're getting a lot of fluke singles. I don't like the Texas Rangers to sustain the level of offense that they have unless they're playing in Arlington every single game. The good news for them, they're playing there in half of them. But anyways, back to Ronaldo Ventura. I really like his K9. It's pretty close to 1 an inning. He's going about 6.1 average innings. I think that overall he is a decent lower end cash play game. I'm not going to go too deep. I'm not going to be looking at the Alex Colomb, David Phelps level for cash play. But I think that Ronaldo Ventura is the cheapest that I would be willing to go in cash play on a day like today. Next for cash is Danny Salazar at Baltimore. I really like Danny Salazar just as a general pitcher, but as we all have seen from him, he kind of gives up a lot of home runs. And when he gives up one home run, he kind of comes in bunches. With him, it seems to be so much more mental than it is anything about his physical tool set or his ability to locate the ball, because when you watch him on the days where he's striking out 12, he is dialed and he can hit his points. And I mean, he has some of the best stuff this league has seen in a long time. His K9 of 11.69 is just enough to prove that he just knows how to blow by people. Yes, he has a very, very high BIBIP, so he should actually get better. His ERA is at 3.79 and his xFIP is at 2.78. Yeah, 2.78. That's lower than Madison Bumgarner's. That is lower than Yonata Ventura's. That is lower than Jason Hamels. And that is right there comparable to Felix Hernandez. I really like Danny Salazar moving forward. And I think that against the Baltimore Orioles, it is a tough matchup. But if he can keep the ball in the park, he is a phenomenal play for both cash and GPP.
Strike!
Next, we have to look at pitchers to stack against. I think that Severino Gonzalez is going to have the worst night of anyone. His hit score is at 31.02. Now, to put that in comparison, the next person's hitter score, which is next on my list, is 19.49. Now, 19.49 is actually a pretty decent hitter score, but overall, 31.02 is a very, very high hitter score. You don't really see anything above 30 too much in my projection model. Severino Gonzalez versus the San Francisco Giants. The Giants know how to get on base. They know how to steal bases. They know how to produce runs, and sometimes they hit it out of the park. I really don't like Severino Gonzalez. His BIBIP is very, very large right now, so he will get better, but his ERA is sitting at 6.88. That's not good. He's letting out a home run per game. He's walking 2 people, and he's striking out close to 7. I don't think that Severino Gonzalez can survive against the San Francisco Giants. I don't see that in him. He's struggling against lefties mightily, allowing their weighted on base to be over 500. I don't like Severino Gonzalez in today's matchup. I think the next worst is going to be Desponchi of going up against the Reds. I think that he does have a decent hit score. I think that he could be a very cheap cash play if you're willing to get a little bit risky, but I don't see it just because, he's just not that good of a pitcher. He almost lost his job a little while ago. His average innings is down. His K to innings is very, very low. I just think that the Cincinnati Reds are going to have a lot of opportunities to swing the bat, and the Cincinnati Reds just know how to swing the bat hard and out of the park, and that's something that he's struggling with, allowing 1.09 home runs a game right now. I don't think that Desponchi's is a good match, and the fact that he doesn't know how to locate the strike zone too well, and when he does, it gets hit out a lot. I think that the Reds, as a big power boom type lineup, is actually going to do a lot of damage against Desponchi's. Next up is going to be the Miami Dolphins pitcher David Phelps against the Colorado Rockies in Colorado. Anybody playing against the Rockies right now in Colorado is looking to get bruised up a little bit. Their hit score is at 26.57, so not as bad as Severino Gonzalez, but it's in Colorado, so it could get nasty very quickly. He doesn't really give up a whole bunch of home runs, giving up half a home run a game right now, and his peripherals look like what he's doing right now is pretty sustainable, which is about 3.5 ERA. So I think that the Rockies could beat that norm, and if they can get the ball out of the park, they can hit the doubles, they can get the outfielders playing back and hit the singles. I think that it could get nasty pretty quickly. I have David Phelps as my third worst pitcher on today's slate. The next is Alex Colomé of Seattle Mariners. I'm just not the biggest fan of Colomé and his arsenal. People were touting him pretty highly last year, but I never really saw it when I was watching his stuff. He doesn't have anything that truly impressed me. His ERA at 4.55 is pretty close to where I projected him at the beginning of the year. Those Sierra has him closer to 3.72. I just don't think he's that good. He's struggling against both the righties and the lefties. His strikeouts isn't that good at 6.67. I think that the Mariners are going to have a lot of chances to match some at-bats today. I think that they could put up quite a bit, and I think with Felix Hernandez on their mound, they want to look to get out and put a lot of points out there. But I'm not the most confident in Alex Colomé as a for sure go ahead, they're going to get 10 runs today type of pitcher. I have it more towards this could get ugly quick, or this could be a good game for Alex Colon. That's the type of game they're looking at. It's a little bit more risky. And next is Jesse Chavez versus Boston. Jesse Chavez is a pretty above average pitcher. I kind of like him just in general, but going up against Boston, it kind of doesn't favor him too well. He's doing really good against righties, but the Boston Red Sox have some really good left-handed hitters. I think that his BIBIP at 2.69 isn't completely sustainable for him, and his Sierra kind of points that out for him. His ERA is sitting at 2.11, and his Sierra is at 3.65. I don't like Jesse Chavez to continue the streak, and I think that starts today against the Boston Red Sox.
Next up to bat.
All right, next we have to look at the GPP plays. At first, I have Danny Salazar against the Baltimore Orioles. The Baltimore Orioles are very swing and miss here lately. They're either putting up a lot of runs or they're not putting up much to any. And I think with Danny Salazar's ability to strike out one, maybe two people an inning is phenomenal against a team swinging as often as the Baltimore Orioles are doing right now. He's walking a large amount of people at 2.5 per game. He's giving up a home run, but like I said, he's either locked in or he's locked out. There's no really in between for Danny Salazar. So in a GPP play, I think you have to be looking at Danny Salazar because he frankly has the potential that if he goes 7 innings, he could strike out 12. He could strike out 14 if he went 8. He's just that type of pitcher. I really like Danny Salazar in a GPP play. And for my next option, it's kind of to the same tone, Clayton Kershaw. Obviously, Clayton Kershaw is a better pitcher than Danny Salazar. He knows how to control the ball a lot better. His numbers are from bad defense. He's going up against a really good team in the St. Louis Cardinals, a team that I think that the Dodgers want to really get a win against to solidify themselves to get past the recent slump that they're getting on. And I think that they want to give Clayton Kershaw as much run support as they can because that's their guy. Clayton Kershaw has a very high K inning ratio right now. I think that the Cardinals, when they are getting pummeled, they just keep getting pummeled. They seem to be a team that either scores a lot of runs or that they seem to get in their own head. But the one person you have to watch out for is Matt Carpenter. If Matt Carpenter sets the pace and he sets the pace pretty hot, it might not be the best play for Clayton Kershaw. You might see other pitchers score more than him, but I think that you're pretty locked in Clayton Kershaw being a top 5 pitcher tomorrow, with his downside being a top 10. It's just the type of pitcher that Clayton Kershaw is. Next is Felix Hernandez, for the same similar reasons. Big strikeout stuff. Has a history against the opponent. I think that it's obvious. You got to be looking at Clayton. You got to be looking at Felix. You got to be looking at David Price. You got to be looking at Madison Bumgarner in GPP play, just because of the potential to throw a complete game shutout, no hitter, complete game type of game. They're just that phenomenal of a pitcher. But speaking of David Price versus Chicago White Sox, Chicago White Sox are an interesting play against David Price. They bullied him pretty early, a little bit earlier in the year, and David Price's numbers themselves are looking a little skittish in a way. I mean, his ERA is at 3.15. Don't get me wrong, that's ace material right there. But when you begin to look at his xFIP of 3.91, you got to really begin to just question him and where he's heading in the future. If you're a fantasy player and you're not just a DFS player, I would look to actually sell David Price pretty high right now. I don't think that the numbers that you're getting are sustainable for him. I think you're going to see that home run fly ball ratio go up a little bit. You're going to see that BIBIP go down a little bit. You're going to see that left on base average out a little bit. But overall, I like David Price as a GPP option today at best. I'm not going to be rostering David Price in cash play whatsoever, as you could tell by me not even listing him in the pitchers to use for cash. I think Julio Teheran is pretty interesting because he is an ace in disguise. Last year he was phenomenal, and this year he's just not translating it too well. His 4.87 ERA is just not sitting too well, but I mean his Sierra is at 4.49, so he's just not pitching well in general. But he does have the stuff and he does have the history to suggest that he could have a really good game against the Pittsburgh Pirates. I'm not saying he will. I'm just saying that I'm going to mix him in case he decides he wants to dial it in a little bit, because he does have great stuff. I also like Brett Oberholzer going against Toronto. It's just a matchup that nobody's going to be on, and he has great K9 stuff. I think that he could really do a lot of damage. Also, AJ Cole. We could go with AJ Cole. I kind of like that. That's a cool name for him. AJ Cole versus Chicago Cubs. He had a great outing last time. He's not going to get to go pretty deep into the game, but if for whatever reason they let him throw 7 innings, he could do a lot of damage against the Cubs. But he's just an outside option. I'm not even sure I would really mix in AJ Cole, but if you're going to be somebody that's playing 30, 40, 50 different types of lineups into a tournament, I think you should mix AJ Cole and Brett Oberholzer in. I think that they're outside looks for a pretty GPP, big arm, heavy day. I think that with the low percentage, they could be an outside pick. All right, I'm running a little over today, so I need to run through these hitters for cash pretty quickly, so bear with me just a little bit here. First up, at catcher, I really like Russell Martin versus the handedness of Brett Oberholzer. I know I just got done talking about him as an outside shot, but that's what he is. He's an outside shot. He's no one you're going to look at consistently. Russell Martin a lot. He's at 4.08 PF adjusted. That's the top catcher on today's play. I think that he just matches up pretty well. The next is Stephen Vaught against Joe Kelly. I have him at 3.74 PF adjusted. That's pretty good. He's hitting for a high average. He's hitting a whole bunch of home runs. He's the team setter. Stephen Vaught's been it all for the Oakland A's so far. And I think that if they're going to beat the Red Sox at all, it's going to be primarily through his hands, by commanding the staff and by commanding the bat. At catcher, I also like Miguel Montero versus AJ Cole just because of the handedness matchup, but I think Miguel Montero is always primarily a GPP play, and if you need to save some cash, he might be a decent looking cash play, but primarily I'm looking at Miguel Montero if he's starting to be a GPP play. At first base, I actually have some surprises. I really like Brandon Belt versus Severino Gonzalez. As I mentioned before, I really like the Giants. I really like Adam Lind versus J.R. Graham. Adam Lind is always a good sneaky GPP cash play. He's just constantly consistent, and sometimes he just has a big game. I really like Freddie Freeman versus Jeff Locke. I have him at right around a 3.6 PF adjusted, so that's pretty elite status for him right now. Logan Morrison versus Alex Colomé. That's a really cheap option for you that I don't think many people are going to be looking at in cash, but if you need to save money for elsewhere, which I don't know why you should since there's so many expensive and great options at first base, but if you want to load up an outfield or get the bigger name second baseman and shortstops, then I don't blame you for going with someone like Logan Morrison versus Alex Colomé. I have him at a 3.52 PF adjusted, so that's more than respectable. That's a pretty above average number for him. D. Gordon versus Kyle Kendrick. D. Gordon is just phenomenal against the handedness, and against a guy like Kyle Kendrick in Colorado, I think that you could see him get on base multiple times, and I think you could see him steal and be aggressive early in a game that I think they know they're going to need a lot of points, and I think that D. Gordon is going to be setting that base path pretty on fire, and I think he's going to be trying to score a lot of runs. I really like D. Gordon against Kyle Kendrick. Third base, Josh Donaldson versus Brett Oberholzer. He's at a 4.03 leading the charge for third baseman. Manny Machado versus Danny Salazar. Machado just tends to have really big games, and when he does get on base, he tends to make the most out of it. I like Manny Machado. He's just a really well-polished player. Nolan Arenado versus David Phelps. Again, that should be a high-scoring game. I think that David Phelps is somebody to stack up against, so why not play Nolan Arenado at the hot corner? At shortstop, Young Ho Kong versus Julio Teheran. I think that the handedness matchup is great. He has a power potential. He has a steal potential. He's hitting in a pretty decent spot in the order. Jose Iglesias versus John Danks is another solid option. He has a really good history against John Danks, and the Tigers as a whole have a good history against John Danks. And Jose Iglesias always just seems to be a cheap but very, very consistent play. Brandon Crawford versus Severino Gonzalez. At outfield, Chris Colabello versus Brett Oberholzer. Same at cheap price, great option. Has power and steal potential is my number 2 option, Gregory Polanco. I think that Gregory Polanco is starting to find his own way, and I think that he's starting to match up against the handedness pretty well. Next would be Giancarlo Stanton against Kyle Kendrick. Like I mentioned, that game should be a lot of points, and against a pitcher like Kyle Kendrick, I think that you could see Giancarlo Stanton have a multi-home run game. If not, he will at least get a few RBIs, I would imagine. And I also like Adam Jones versus Danny Salazar and Nelson Cruz versus Alex Colomé. Nelson Cruz versus the handedness, always a great play, very expensive for cash, primarily seen as a GPP option, but in reality, the way that Nelson Cruz is hitting the handedness, you should be able to look for Nelson Cruz to perform well for you in cash play. And that'll do it for our cash plays for hitters. All right, guys, thanks for checking into today's podcast. Be sure to follow me at Sports Porch. Tweet me with anything you might have related to fantasy baseball, fantasy basketball, DFS, or fantasy football. I'm here for you. I can answer any type of question, be it minor leagues, be it dynasty, be it salary, be it auction values, anything. I got you covered. Just follow me and tweet me, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks for checking in. Be sure to give me some feedback, and I look forward to talking to you guys later. Bye.